Well, hello, Gospel Chapel. It is Pastor Doug here, and welcome to Gospel Conversations, Episode 3. Today, I had a conversation with Jon Luesink, who is the Director of Mobilization for Avant Ministries, and he's going to just share with us a bit about his own life and journey, his journey with Jesus, their work with Avant Ministries, a bit about his family, and then the second half of the interview, we're going to talk a lot about the Discovery Bible Study method and what that looks like, how it's effective, how Jon has implemented that in his own life and ministry, even just within his own neighborhood, but how that also worked very well for them as they were missionaries and church planters in the Czech Republic. So without giving away anything else on that, here is my conversation with Jon Luesink. All right. Well, good afternoon, Gospel Chapel. It is Pastor Doug here. It is, I was going to say March, but it's not March at all. It's January 5th. And I am here with Jon Luesink, one of our supported missionaries. Jon is a Director of Mobilization with Avant Ministries. And just to give you a little bit of background on Avant, Avant is an denominational, multinational missionary sending organization that is focused on planting and developing churches in unreached areas of the world. And they've been doing this since 1890. So Avant defines unreached places where, as those where there is less than 2% of the population is evangelical Christian. And at this time, more than 2 billion people are still in need of hearing the gospel. So Avant's ministry is to train, send, and to serve missionaries in roughly 50 countries globally right now. And so we're going to get to know Jon here a little bit before we dive into his ministry with Avant. And then we're going to transition. We're going to talk a little bit about something that I've put forward a number of times over this 2-year period, the Discovery Bible Study method. Jon and his family have a lot of experience with that, and we'll hear about that and how that can work for us here as well. So before we dive into your ministry, Jon, with Avant, let's get to know you a bit. Can you tell us a little bit about your story? Where did you grow up, and when did you become a Jesus follower?
Yeah, well, my story began in Ontario. That's where I was born. And shortly after I was born, my dad took on his first church as a pastor. And so I grew up as a pastor's kid. And my journey to Jesus kick-started when I was 9 years old, when my grandma died. And I realized I'm going to die one day too. And so I went to my dad and said, what do I need to do about this? And he told me about Jesus and his plan. I called out and asked for Jesus to restart my life and began following him then. And I could dive into the story a little bit more, but the biggest thing is he freed me from the fear of death.
Right.
And so when I had surgery behind my ear when I was 17, I realized, hey, I'm going to go get to know Jesus if I die, because the doctor said there's a 1% chance I might die in the surgery.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, well, I'm sure I'm going to Jesus, but I'd like to get to know him before I die. So I committed. I'm going to begin reading your scriptures, Lord, and getting to know you, because I kind of just been an occasional Bible reader
right
up to the age of 17, such that when I got into Bible college and seminary, this is, I guess, bridging into my journey with Jesus, which is where you want me to go, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yep.
Okay. So graduated from seminary, came into my first pastoral position out here in Chilliwack, where we remained for 12 years. And at age 26, again, the beautiful preparation for pain and suffering the Lord had been leading me through. That was the majority of the text that he was having me meditate on for those 9 years. And, memorizing, writing songs for teaching, all that kind of stuff. And then at age 26, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. And so they dove in. I now have a semicolon. Yep.
Yeah.
And God carried me through that in wonderful, wonderful ways. like joyful tears of anticipation, like just peaceful anticipation going into that dark spot, because I already knew what it was like to go through the surgery before, from when I was 17. And then later on, as we went from being in 12 years in pastoral ministry in Chilliwack, youth and worship ministry.
What church was that at?
Sardis Fellowship Baptist Church.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I was with the Fellowship Baptist when I was in mission.
Oh, were you? Okay. Over on Cherry Street?
Yep.
There you are.
North Valley.
Excellent. Yep. I'm heading over there to talk to the new pastor about DBS and Zoom stuff. In the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. That's Isaac Dagno. He was a student in my classes, and when I taught at Pacific Life Bible College, and it was a real joy to hand off the ministry of North Valley to him when we took the call to come to Grand Forks.
There you go, man. Small world stuff, right? And that's just this week. I just got the email like 2 days ago, and I haven't met Isaac yet. So,
all right. Well, say hi.
Yeah, indeed, I shall. That's fun. Wow.
Excellent.
So then, out of here, God asked us to think about taking on more responsibility for his kingdom, and asked us if we wouldn't think about becoming missionaries instead.
Okay.
So then we headed out with Avant to lead their church planting team over to the Czech Republic, where we were for 8 years. And ostensibly, the surface reason was to go try to figure out how to plant a church there.
Okay.
God's core assignment for me was to learn about his power and ability above my own, and to learn about his ideas for church beyond my Canadian Baptist culture.
Yeah.
And so those things were solidly accomplished while we were over in Prague those 8 years.
Right.
And additionally, God gave me another opportunity. I had to get my thyroid out. You can see the scar here, maybe kind of not really on the screen.
Okay.
When I was over in Prague, and so I'm going to heaven piece by piece. And another opportunity to be in the hospital, to be praying for people and meeting with Czechs, and even just like a different vibe than the doctors and nurses are used to. Because if you're a Czech person who's an atheist, they have a saying at New Year's: above all things, health. Because if you haven't got your health, what have you got in this life, especially if there's nothing beyond it?
Right.
The opportunity to speak with people about Christ in the hospital there was wonderful. And also another reminder of myself that I'm a frail person, groaning and waiting for my eternal dwelling place while this tent slowly falls apart.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this is kind of my next question was, what are some of the defining moments in your journey? And you're covering those for us. So that's awesome. So 8 years in the Czech Republic, what was next?
Well, coming back from there, that was a difficult transition for me because I hadn't realized how attached to significance I was in my ego, or my flesh desires. And so I had an opportunity. I was being offered promotions within Avant, and it felt so good. And my wife said, "Hey, I'm really quite tired after these 8 years, and our kids are moving into adult life. I think we need to go back to Canada." And to me, that was like death, because I had inherited this erroneous view that missionary recruiters were like the garbage leftovers of burned out ministry people.
You're the has-been of ministry.
That's right. What do you do when you're worn out? What do you do if you failed at the field? You come back. And now I know many wonderful recruiters who are wonderful, amazing people in the crowning moments of their life. But somehow that was in my brain that it was going to steal my sense of significance. But the defining moment was God wrestling me to say, "No, Jon, go back and do this thing. Take care of your family, and I will lead you to a spacious place. And I'll show you what it is I want you to do."
Awesome. Well, yeah, let's talk about your family a little bit. I don't know much about them. Where did you and your wife meet? How long you guys been married?
You got it. Well, we met in my first year of Bible college, her second. 2.5 years later, we were married in 1992, which I remind all my kids was a very young age, age 20. And although our eldest son, he just got married at age 21, I believe. And so that was back over a good while over a year ago, back in June of the first round of COVID.
Okay, 2020.
Yeah, that's it.
Years don't mean much right now, do they?
No. So that was the first wedding in a barn that I'd ever been to, where we could only have 50 people, and it was absolutely marvelous. And the Lord has blessed them with their first child. So we have little Kinsley Ann and we're grandparents.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys were just in Edmonton just before the floods hit.
Yeah, right? I was up there.
Okay.
And my family was trapped down here while I was trapped out of the Lower Mainland. That's right.
Yeah. Cool. So you've been married for, that's 20...
Coming up to 30 this year.
Coming up to 30 years this year. Awesome. And how your kids, how old are they?
Yeah. So Eric is 23 now, the eldest. He's the one married to Danielle. And then there's Greg, who is in his fourth year of kinesiology here at University of the Fraser Valley. And he's enjoying all that kind of stuff. He just marvels at God's design of the body. He just thrives in learning and exploring that sort of thing. And then on Sunday, I get to be on his worship team at church, which is pretty fun. I'm doing backup vocals and guitar for him.
Oh, cool.
And then our next is Mallory, and she's working through her teaching degree at UFE, taking a break this semester. She's really enjoyed camp ministry here locally and is enjoying spreading her wings. She's living up there at camp and working part-time and studying and things. And then our youngest, and she's, did she just turn 19? And I'm getting all the ages right. And then they change every year. It's hard to keep track of.
Yeah, I know. It's rough.
And our 14-year-old is downstairs right now, waiting for school to start up here again.
Right.
Heading off to tennis lessons. And she's an aspiring author. She's written a short story for a Canadian competition and quite an artist. And she even made these for me for Christmas. So
nice.
She carved these things, and anyway, it's kind of fun. They're not actual functional things.
Okay. Awesome.
One more thing. So she made this thing.
Oh wow!
It's like a dinosaur out of clay, and it's pretty cool. So there's a little bit about my kids.
Right on. Awesome. Okay, so you've been connected to Gospel Chapel for quite a while here. How did that connection come about? How long have we been supporting you as a missionary family? And what's your connection here? How did we get to know you?
Well, I think it was kind of random. I think it was in about 2007, 2008. That the church was looking to support new missionaries, and they're looking for missionaries that they could support who could also come to visit.
Right.
And so I think, if I understand well, they reached out to Avant and just said, is anybody going out soon that lives in our area that would be willing to connect? They said, yeah, we got the Luesinks, and you're on the road to where my parents used to live in Creston. Okay. And so it was easy to say yes. If there's a church that's interested in supporting, yes, we'll come.
Well, of course. That's right. Whoever turns that down.
Exactly. So so we came out, and our first visit was very fun because years and years ago, when I was a youth pastor, the nephew of Corny and Aggie Pauls had taken us out to their ranch, where we stayed in a cabin and had one of the most memorable youth retreats that we'd ever experienced in our youth group. And so we got to stay with Corny and Aggie just across the road at the church. And so there's that beginning of familiar relational connection there that way. Okay. Yeah. Going back to 2008.
Okay. Awesome. That's great. Well, how about you tell us a bit about your, you've already talked about your call to ministry and how God led that. How did you end up serving with Avant? There's lots of missions organizations out there. You felt God calling you into ministry. How did it land with Avant?
Yeah. Hey, I wonder if maybe this could explain it the best. So this is something I've made up now. Can you see that at all?
Yep.
Okay.
Why Avant?
The why Avant. So this is what I tell other people about what attracted me to Avant, so that maybe we connect them. And it's the idea of what you've already explained, where 40% of the world is unreached.
Okay.
So, hey, let's go there as a mission agency. And then the next layer of interest to me was this, that they're interested in planting churches.
Okay.
There's different ways to go about planting churches, but that new communities of faith is what we're shooting for.
Right.
And I saw that different agencies had focus that was quite diversified, but this was very focused. They also said, hey, this is our atmosphere of faith, and we're going to live this out. And this is what God was challenging me to learn, because I would proclaim the power of the gospel to people,
right?
But I would trust my ability to organize events for my youth group.
Right.
I would trust in Jon's ability to collect people for Vacation Bible School and pull off big events. And I pretty much figured that prayer was somebody else's job. And therefore, I was getting this whole atmosphere of faith wrong. And Avant was saying, when you go to the mission field, to the bleeding edge, you're going to need to engage in the primacy of prayer, trust God's ability, his ability to organize lucky coincidences. And you just got to get people in touch with the power of the gospel and let it do its work. And then the last two things that really kicked it over for me was, well, one is this idea of going out as teams.
Okay.
And trusting in some pretty cool principles of how we're going to work, that they're kind of flexible. Right. And also the last thing, this is maybe more than you wanted, but they gave this is really super hard for you to see. So people can ask about this.
Okay.
How do you know you've actually started a church, that a group has become a church?
Right.
And how do you know a little baby church has actually become healthy and it's ready to be independent? And that they actually had like metrics, like to measure, are we close? Do we know we're there? And that they're based on biblical characteristics. That gave me a lot of confidence of the focus of, if I'm going as a second career person, going out of a pastor job, I'm not just going to be flying by the seat of my pants. They've got some principles that are guiding me, and I really value those. So that's me.
Right. That's awesome. I mean, and I guess with like starting in the 1890s, they've got some experience in this game.
That's right. Oh,
yeah. So this is some tried and true and proven. This is how we as a church need to function. This is what the marks of a healthy church, and how to establish those and grow them. So that is awesome. And so you've been with them since, when was that again?
2007. We were appointed.
2007. So a good long time. And what you've served overseas in the Czech Republic. Yep. And now you're Director of Mobilization. Was there any in between there? Like you started with them with the Czech Republic, and now you're doing this job. Any other things that happened along the way?
No. It's everything flows in a kind of continuous line, just like you've described.
Okay. And so what is this position you're doing now? Director of Mobilization. You're now the recruiter, getting people to go overseas. Is that basically it?
It's finding the next generation of missionaries to go out among the least reached.
Right. And
so sometimes you may call it like being the head talent scout.
Yeah.
Finding, who might be ready next. And then also making people aware of it.
Okay.
So it's not just a car salesman who waits for people to come to the lot. It's actually people who go out and promote the idea that cars are a good thing.
Right.
Or that mission is an actual need, and that it's on God's heart.
Right. How have you seen that develop and change even over like how long have you been Director of Mobilization, and have you seen a trend? Is it more difficult now than 10 years ago?
Yeah, very much so. I to harken back to the car salesman, in the old days, you were just a car salesman on a lot, and you could show up at a car salesman conference and people are like, yeah, I want a Toyota. No, I want a Mazda. No, I'm really a Ford guy, or whatever. And they just go around and select their brand. People were lining up in the old days.
Yeah.
Now people don't even know if they want a car.
Yeah. all the Bible colleges, if you go back in time, they were all founded on this thing of we're equipping people to go into ministry and go on mission.
Yeah.
And how many of them are still on that track?
Yeah.
Very, very few, right? They've had to diversify because students aren't necessarily looking to go into ministry or on the mission field anymore.
Yeah. And then there's also some other really big, astounding shifts. Like it used to be that there was this integral, like everywhere there was an interest in missions, that churches were born with this idea of missions and that they're raising up the next generation. So it almost could be like a harvesting tool,
right,
just to go around and harvest. But like in the last number of decades, like the thinking within a lot of churches has shifted to being small K kingdoms rather than God's big K kingdom.
Right.
And so it's almost become a competition between churches and mission sending agencies. And then churches saying, we're the church and you're those parachurch guys that are stealing our best people and our resources, our money. And
right.
So there was also this weird trend that way. And then probably the worst trend is that, like, you may know, I've shared this in other spaces, but the church in North America has been in decline since 1927.
Yeah.
The growth rate of churches the growth rate by conversion, by people come to Christ, hasn't exceeded the death rates in churches since 1927. And at present, we've gone since 96 from 12% of the population in 2015 to 9% of the population being evangelical. And in 2020, we were at 6% of the population. So you see that decline.
Right.
And estimates are right now, COVID is killing the North American church, that what would have taken 5 years is likely going to happen in 1.
Yeah.
And so this is the biggest change. Not only are we not finding as many fish in the river to go fishing for new missionaries,
mm-hmm.
the river is becoming a pond.
Yeah.
And so there's a need for a huge revolution in how we approach recruiting as a collective of churches and mission agencies. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I've been hearing too that places like Korea are now the second largest sending country in the world, next to the United States. And the reality is that North America is going to need to be a receiving of missionaries instead of sending, because the decline is happening so rapidly.
Yeah.
So
it's we've identified it, calling it, there's a disciple making crisis in Canada, and
yes,
the big shift is we need to be a part of reversing that, or else we're all in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of your current projects then? I mean, this is the last 2 years have been a gong show. How have you been functioning in this mess? How do you send people out when borders are closed? And what do you do with this at this point? And then what's on the horizon for this year?
Yeah. So one of the fun changes. So I like a storm. And I kind of get excited when things go kablooey, because it's often then that it's sort of like you pull back the stove from the wall and you see how much junk collected over the years.
Yeah.
And like sensing there's been a need for change, but change is painful.
Absolutely.
And until there's a greater pain approaching, people aren't necessarily willing to make the change.
Yeah.
Which is what my son in kinesiology always tells me about why I need to obey his fitness plans for my life rather than waiting for a diagnosis. That to his 50-year-old dad.
Right.
And I should listen to my son. So regarding health, but as we know, it's hard unless you're motivated. So COVID has provided a motivation.
Okay.
So here's one big change that has been delightful in the last year. Before COVID, God was already stirring in the hearts of multiple mission agencies, realizing that there was a dwindling interest in evangelism and disciple making and church planting among unreached people groups. The hot topics were nice topics, like, social justice and things like that, important things that the church needs to do. But people were trending towards that, which is like, if you go back to this diagram,
right.
you know how many missionaries of the 400,000 missionaries deployed in the world, how many of them go to this 40%? 3% of all missionaries go to the unreached.
Wow.
97% of the missionaries we send out in the world go to Christianized countries or people who have access to the gospel. So we're saying, hey, we need to draw attention to this. And so let's cooperate with one another, because usually sometimes we're seen as competitors.
Yeah.
As different mission agencies all trying to pluck the same fruit from the same sparse tree. and recognizing as well, hey, the river's become a pond, the fish are dying, we need to help engage this. So we helped start something called the Great Commission Co-op, and right now we're 21 different mission agencies that are collaborating to raise awareness of the unreached people groups, to be able to send out beautiful feet to make disciples among the unreached people groups. And those partnerships were forming, like the deep trust and the sense of being willing to do risky steps of faith together was growing just as COVID hit. And so we collaborated and said, hey, we can put on online workshops for colleges and churches. And this has really been growing this sense of big K kingdom rather than little K kingdom stuff of competing mission agencies.
Yeah.
So that's been really, really cool and a big revolution. And then perhaps the biggest one, it's been in the works for about a year and a half, but it's finally come into fruition. And that would be me being able to engage in a recruitment revolution. So it's asking that question, hey, if no one's lining up at the car lot anymore, we need to go back to, why do we need cars?
Right.
And go back to the basics. And so what we noticed over these 5.5 years that I've been here, and this was true even before this, we're the scariest mission there is. Because we say, okay, do you want to go among the least reached people groups? So scary place, hard place.
Yeah.
And then we use the word, do you want to do church planting? And everybody freaks out in their mind because they're thinking about the gung-ho pastor and his wife that's going to need to support all this, setting up chairs in a gym and a sandwich board on the sidewalk. And they just think in their mind, I could never plant churches. And then so we kind of need to step it down. Well, would you like to join a team that would be making disciples that create communities of faith? And they go, well, I'd like to make disciples, but I've never been discipled.
Right.
And then the next question is then, well, would you like to be discipled?
Yeah.
Become a disciple maker. And so what we're inviting people into is that question, would you like to learn how to make a disciple in your hometown where you live now? Right. In a way that's COVID proof.
Yeah.
because that's provided this great mind-blowing thing. If we can't gather all together, how do we make disciples? We're going to need to learn how to do it smaller, which means more of us need to know how to do it.
Right. Absolutely.
So we're inviting people into that. Do you want to learn how to make disciples? Generally, the experience is when you invite people to learn how to make disciples, only about 10% of the people who go through the training actually want to count the cost. Right. Of what it costs to make disciples. But we would invite those people, if they're beginning to see fruit and they're faithful in the costly and immediate obedience that's involved in making disciples, to invite them into a space that has seen up to 4 generations of disciples and churches multiplying, and then invite them to take that learning and deploy among a diaspora community, which is, the diaspora is the spreading of people around the world. So like immigrants and refugees from other countries. So say, for example, they could go and begin to do start Discovery Bible studies among Muslim immigrants in the Vancouver area, to be coached by people who are a few years ahead of them, learn to set up a simple church network among those people. And then from those folks say, okay, you learned how to do it here in Canada. You've seen what it looks like to multiple generations of disciples in simple churches. You've experienced it. Are you ready to go to another place to do this? Right. so that we're not just making this huge leap from I've never been discipled to do you want to plant churches?
Yeah. In another part of the world where you don't even know the culture. Yeah. And let's work on discipleship here where you kind of got your own cultural things that you can still navigate, bring the barriers down, but raise the bar at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And the joy of this is as I've been traveling this last 5.5 years is finding out how many pastors and churches and individuals are hungry for this.
Yeah.
And especially now awakened in COVID, then we got to figure this out. And so if I get a chance to help and assist and catalyze those things, and that's the relationship that we have like
right.
all around the country, and a whole network of supporting that is happening, then I think all us mission agencies are going to find there's a lot more fruit to harvest for the cornfield, because God's going to be waking people up saying just, hey, where do you want me to go next, God?
Right.
Where are the empty spaces on the map that we need to fill in? Yeah.
That is awesome. I think that's a good transition here for us too, to hit on this second topic. And that is the Discovery Bible Study Method. Now I've poked at this a few times over the past 2 years, created kind of a one-page, here it is, for our community groups, that kind of just walks you through that whole thing. But I mean, providing that for people and actually implementing it is two different things.
Right.
Right. And so what I'd like to hear, you and your family, I think when we met for lunch, what was that? Was that last summer or was that 2020?
I think I was driving through in June.
It was in June, just this last year, because we met at the station. The station pub was open again. So we had lunch together there and we talked a little bit about this then. And you mentioned at that point that it was really something that you and your family needed and used while you were overseas. And that's something that your kids still use. So why don't you just tell us a bit about how you came to use Discovery Bible Study Method, where you found it, and how you implemented that just in your own walk. And then we'll talk about how do we implement this as a church ministry tool for discipleship.
Sure. Well, the way it started, the space that was created that made me receptive for it was Avant's Principles for Church Planting. Okay. Which said we don't need the forms of how we do church in North America, where you say, hey, you need a building, you need programs, you need a staff, and you need a budget, and therefore you have a church. They said, no, the basics of a church is, I'll read this off here to make sure I don't get it mixed up there. An essential, a basic church means you've got 3 or more believers gathered together. That's the first thing, who are meeting at least once a month, but are meeting regularly, who recognize they are the body of Christ to one another and are organizing themselves to do God's will. And if you at least connect those dots, you've got the beginning of a church. And then we define 13 other biblical characteristics to measure health. Right. But they're biblical character qualities, not forms and structures. Wow. So that helped. That cleared the space. Right. Then we arrived with Prague with all sorts of amazing North American ideas of how to plant churches.
How'd that go?
Well, thankfully, this is how it went. Our boss said, our director said, why don't you spend like a year and a half researching and praying and see if those are good ideas? and just as a note, everything big we imagined, because North America, we tend to think big gathering, big, right. Yep. Center stage, all this kind of stuff. Everything we thought of, it turns out, because we started interviewing people in the Czech Republic, I think we interviewed about 90 people in depth. About 60 of them were non-believers, 20 of them were Czech Christian leaders, and 10 of them were missionaries there, saying, hey, if we want to plant a church here that Czechs would want to make more of after we leave, what advice would you give us? And we began collecting this understanding of Czech culture, and especially when the Czech Christian leaders said, the best thing that you can do is what we're doing right now. You're the first missionaries that have arrived and have asked us for advice, which blew our mind. Right. because of the warning we got from our director that said, be humble, that helped us. But out of that, we designed some experiments to try to figure out, how do we share the gospel here? How do we help people come to Christ? Mm-hmm. And after 2.5 years, like a year and a half, we learned, studied, got to know people, asked questions, a year of experimentation, and everything had failed. Every idea had failed. We have one joke that we designed this bus, and then we thought, well, we need to make sure that the Czechs feel like they're driving. And then so we went to the back of the bus to visit with the Czechs, metaphorically speaking. And then our experiment crashed because no one was actually driving the bus. Anyway, a whole bunch of experiments failed. And then we got accustomed to, remember that piece where I said we need to engage in the primacy of prayer, hey?
Right. Yep.
So our team had learned to love each other, to get along with each other in unity, and we learned to pray more than we ever had in our lives. And we devoted a week of prayer and fasting from ministry to say, Lord, what's next? We got together on Friday afternoon, and we're like, hey, so Lord, gave you anything? We're like, I didn't get anything, just a great peaceful time with the Lord. And then we got a call, I believe, in that meeting saying, do you want to come to the East Lands? There's a missionary trying something new, and there's some other folks that are doing some really interesting stuff. So the next day, we're on a car ride driving 4 hours all the way across the country. Can you imagine 4 hours to get across the country? Yeah. And we get in the other side of things. I know that's just a short trip for y'all, right?
That's not even here to the coast.
I know. So we go over to the East and we meet this missionary, and he describes to us for the first time Discovery Bible Study and how it's multiplying. And we listened, and every failure just went, oh, that's why it hasn't been working, because of all these other weird presuppositions. We just like, this is crafted for Czech culture. This is going to be amazing. Then we went to the next town to visit this other group of people, and they'd already been working at, because they planted 3 churches that had all become mule churches, meaning like they planted it and then it wouldn't multiply because they just got used to coming to Sunday morning theater and sitting there while the performance was going on. Yeah. So how do we do house churches that live together in network that keep reaching out to their neighbors? And so they became and are still our partners with Avant for future teams that go there of learning how to start Discovery Bible Studies that become simple house churches that live together in a network, an organic network, expanding there. So, we began experimenting with that in Prague. We tweaked a few things, which I can tell you a little bit about later. And it turns out that if you tweak too many things in a Discovery Bible Study, it's sort of like tweaking a 4x4 and saying, I think we can get away without these 2 tires. It'll become a motorcycle, right?
Right. Doesn't work.
Doesn't work. So we tweaked enough things out of our own arrogance and North American orientation to doing ministry that we also created a mule church out of our what was a potential to multiply. But as a result, it struggled because of our hubris, our interference with things. So I bring that now as a warning. But the core idea is still marvelous and sees great fruit. So that's how I came across it. Again, I hope that wasn't. I actually truncated that to 3/4 of what I would normally. Only a quarter of what I would normally say.
Yeah. Well, once you guys got into doing Discovery Bible Study method, how did you find that, even just for yourself as a follower of Jesus? What were the benefits for you personally, and then for your family?
Oh, well, like for me, here I am. I'm a Bible college seminary trained person, right? Yeah. Sitting down with brand new Czech believers, and we would come across stuff because it's the idea of having a discussion and letting everybody discover what's really there in the text.
Right.
And I don't have to lead it. I'm just facilitating the discovery. And we have that control where we say, hey, where do you see that in this text? So that people just can't come up with things willy-nilly out of thin air. Yeah. But we would see Czechs teaching us stuff. Like I'm preparing a message about persecution and suffering, and it will open with this introduction about how we regularly found with new believers, we'd be reading the Bible together, and they'd say, "Hey, I see here in the text that it says that Christians should expect suffering and persecution." And we'd be like,
"What?"
And we'd look, and it's like, oh, wow, it's there in the text, and realize that in North America, I've been trained persecution and suffering is not my lot.
Right.
I've got a great healthcare system. Nothing can touch my body. The pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, those are my rights.
Right.
But when they've grown up under communism and Nazism, and before that, the oppression of the Catholic Empire and Austro-Hungarian Empire over them,
right?
They've like 400 years of suffering and persecution.
Right.
They know it can happen to humans, and they see it there in the text, and there it really is. So that's long and short is we could teach each other.
Right.
And even when I'm doing it on the street here with a baker and a retired postman,
mm-hmm.
They're young believers, but they're showing me stuff in the Bible, and we mutually encourage one another. And so it's weird. It's weird to realize that as a seminary trained pastor person, that I can learn from new believers mutually as we're studying together. That's one thing.
Well, yeah. So sometimes you need the fresh eyes that you just no longer have, right? Yeah. To see beyond whatever interpretive grid you've grown accustomed to reading the text through, right? And that's one of the things I when I was teaching Bible college too, I said, we all wear glasses when we come to the text. Where you were born, the culture you grew up in, the language you're speaking, it all affects how we interpret the text. And so having a situation where you've got people that have grown up differently, that have a totally different experience with God, like you said, new believers, because every church we attend adds to our lenses, the theological grids that we grow up with or whatever affect how we interpret. So discovery together, I guess, also coheres very well with what Jesus talked about. I'm going to send the Spirit and he will lead and guide you into all truth. And so it's also trusting God's working in these new believers just as much as me, maybe more so, because I think I have the answers for you. And they're discovering it for the first time or reading that text for the first time, and they may pick up something that we just have always missed. Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is that you're giving people a hermeneutic. They don't even know what the word means.
Right.
A method of interpreting the Bible accurately, such that like when McCall was getting a hang of this just through our studies together. This is funny. We didn't tell him for years that this wasn't normal, but an accompaniment to Discovery Bible Study that you do in groups is a life transformation group where there's like a pair or a trio that are doing accountability. Okay. And so, because people need to be learning to read the Bible on their own, to be self-feeding on their own. So, yes. So we told them, hey, so, it'd be really good now that you're a new believer to read 5 to 7 chapters of the Bible every day and figure out what the Lord's asking you to put off or put on, like off the old, on with the new. And then who do you share this with? And we'd meet together for a half hour, 45 minutes, somewhere along in the middle of the week and do this. And so because they're new believers with no clue that this isn't normal,
right.
They're like reading through the Bible 5 to 7 chapters. And then they realize, because we got them a Bible, the first Bible with footnotes and like links and references of where things happen in the Bible. The first one ever to be put out in the Czech language came just a few years into when we were being there. And so they began Bible surfing. They're like, this is like going on the internet and clicking links and going, because they're like, hey, I need to learn about what's that talking about? Oh, that was talking about David. And they go back to David and they're like, wow, I need to understand that. And then they're discovering all these things. And,
right.
And so one moment, McCall did this surfing and he realized I need to tithe. Okay, I'm going to give 20% of my income. All right. God told you so. I'll let you do that, McCall. And then he reads more and he realizes I need to make sure I'm not giving a blemished lamb to God. In the Czech Republic, 50% of our income, it comes as black money under the table. so the company doesn't have to pay taxes and we don't pay taxes. And that feels like a blemished lamb. He says, I think I need to go to my employer and tell him I need all of my income on top of the table. And sitting there going, I'm just like, wow. Well, McCall, you understand your culture and what that means. Pray and ask the Lord. And so the Lord said, yes. Mm-hmm. Went in to go talk to his boss. His boss was there to resist him with the chief financial officer. Their jaws dropped when McCall told him exactly what I just shared you. He says, this is why I'm giving my money to the Lord. I need it all to be clean. They're like, but we'll have to pay taxes on that part too. And McCall says, I'll pay your portion of the taxes if you're not able to do that. And then their minds were blown further. Then they're so convicted. In the end, they doubled McCall's income in order to work this out for him. So he'd still be going home with the same take-home pay. And then he was able to expand his Christian witness at work. And all of that was from this idea of you're teaching people to a simple hermeneutic of how to understand the Bible and apply it to their life courageously, immediately, and in costly ways. So, yeah. Awesome. That's how we saw it happening with them, and then in our family as well. Them learning, our kids learning at age 11 or 12, they can facilitate a Bible discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have, of course, the North American Church has had small group ministries and small group Bible studies for years and years and years. How is this different? What makes it stand out for you?
Probably like one difference is some studies or small groups focus on one piece or another. Like may focus just on care. Well, DBS makes sure that the care element is happening. Some groups just focus on Bible knowledge acquisition. Well, DBS includes that. And the rarest thing that I experienced, at least doing Bible studies, is most of it, because it was built either on the care element or the Bible knowledge acquisition element, we didn't get to the obey part. How are we going to spur one another on towards love and good deeds?
Yeah.
And that's usually the first place that this falls apart, is people aren't used to obeying the Bible or being asked like to spur one another on to experience the joy of obedience that Jesus calls, to really be his brothers, mothers, and sisters, as Jesus says, who do what God commands. And that idea is usually really foreign and really hard for people to get over. But persist 3 to 6 months persisting. And if the facilitator is transparent, because that's another big thing. We're having to be transparent with what the Holy Spirit's telling us.
Yeah.
Seeing that kick over in one of the groups that I led here in our church, as they got used to that, to see the transformations and then the beautiful bonding that happens when you're transparent because you're helping each other obey. And then the next big level, and it follows in this order, if people aren't obeying the scriptures, they're most likely not going to share it with other people because internally they know they're a hypocrite. They haven't tasted the joy of obedience that Jesus promised. Once they experience the joy of obedience, it becomes fun to share, even though it's terrifying and risky. But that's the other piece, is it says it builds a 3-legged stool of you need to know what Jesus commanded, you need to obey what he's commanded, and then you need to share it with other people. So it's a 3-legged stool rather than a monopod.
Yeah. Cool. So let's say three guys are getting together to go through this. How formal is a discovery group, and how much of it is just kind of laid back? What does it look like as far as just the relational aspect? I mean, you get together, maybe go through these questions. Like I've got this kind of cheat sheet that kind of goes through, talking, what are you thankful for today? Looking back, what did we learn from last week? Who did you tell? What was the response? Reading and retelling the passage, reading and looking, rereading and looking again. What is the passage saying? And then the inside me part. What am I doing well? What do I need to change? And what do I need to do this week? And then who else needs to hear this? Like, I imagine, in a group, say 3 guys sitting down for coffee, that could take you an hour or 2.
Yeah, like I do it with 2 guys on my street.
Okay.
One is a friend. Our kids went to kindergarten together. Our eldest went to kindergarten together, and when his bakery job changed, we started getting together to read the Bible like this. And he's a black belt in karate. And if you know karate, you learn basics and you practice the basic moves.
Right.
So you can just do them. And as you move up in your belts, you begin teaching the lower ranks, right?
Okay.
And so Rick quickly got the hang of it because it's pretty basic. This is the rhythm.
Right.
To use another metaphor, you got your plate, fork, knife, spoon, cup. Plate, fork, knife, spoon, cup. But different stuff to eat every meal, right?
Right. But you set the table the same.
Exactly. You set the table the same. So that because the rhythm is the same, it's your process. And each one of those points builds in the DNA of a disciple. We learn to give thanks to God. We call out to him with our needs. We meet the needs of others on the street. And it just becomes kind of like a rhythm in there. We have to remind ourselves, and we have to make sure we don't skip it, because to change another metaphor, if you start modifying the Discovery Bible Study process too much, like you say, hey, we really don't need that tire. We don't need to talk about whether you obeyed the text from last time. We just took a tire off your 4x4.
Yeah.
So we make sure it's the same. It depends how chatty we are or how high and low our weeks were, like our thankfulness and things. We generally go about an hour and a half. There's the 3 of us. We can fit it into an hour. And when in COVID, when we couldn't meet inside, when it was raining and we were under umbrellas on the front lawn, to which all the neighbors became quite familiar to the strange sight of 3 guys sitting together on a lawn and with umbrellas.
What are these guys doing? Oh, we're studying the Bible together. You're weird. Okay. All right. Want to join us?
And then when we weren't allowed to sit on the lawns, we decided to do a walking Bible study, and we just walk up and down the street praying for the needs of the street. And then we were praying for one guy, and his wheelchair broke down in front of our house, and then we got a chance to connect with him in a meaningful way. And special stuff. Well, what was your question? Now we meandered again, Doug, right?
That's fine.
Together.
What is it? What is a typical, when you get together to meet, it looks like going through these questions, making sure you're keeping the order. You're caring for one another. You're praying for one another. You're looking at what the Bible's saying. You're identifying action steps that you need to take in your life, and you're being held accountable to those with this small group. So that's the kind of commitment we're looking for participants, I think one of the challenges people have sometimes with this is, well, who's leading it? Or is this, we're just participating in this together? You still need kind of a point person, right? That kind of kicks things off, keeps things on track. But what does that kind of look like? What kind of commitment are we asking for participants and leaders in this?
And this is where it's really fun is I'm used to almost preparing a sermon. Like it used to be Bible study was the time you do this talk, right?
Yeah.
Or you design this clever contraption of questions to lead people towards a predetermined end, right? And what a lot of folks are recognizing is that this lets you trust the power of the gospel, the power of the scriptures, the direction of the Holy Spirit. And as long as we keep to the principles in here, which are based on biblical principles of working through, and even just slowing down to read the text, it's amazing how, as long as I know what text we're going to study, maybe we're working our way through a book, maybe we've got a theme, there are topics that we're working through and studying certain scriptures, but it just kind of directs itself. And the only thing I would add to this is we use an acronym called MAWL, MAWL. And picture it like teaching a kid to ride a bike. So you model for the kid on the bike just a little bit so they don't get bored. and then you assist them for a longer while with the hockey stick in the back or running along with your hand behind it. You assist them until they get the hang of it. Mm-hmm. And then you can watch them and you're still coaching them and seeing it happen. And then eventually you can launch them on their own to do it on their own once they've really got the hang of it.
Yeah.
And so the idea with if there's someone that is familiar with how to facilitate, to make sure, like, there's a little bit of timing, there's a little bit of social sensitivity, and you might ask the question in a slightly different way, or just give people time to think. So if there's someone that can model that for a few weeks, within 4 weeks, you should be ready to pass off facilitation to another person who can then pass it off to another person, and you hold each other accountable to run through the pieces and make sure you don't miss the steps and the questions that are involved.
Okay.
And within 6 months or a year, you may find that you're all have really gotten the hang of it, and you've been sharing what you've been discovering with your neighbors, that you're able to go take a step outside and help somebody else start every Bible study.
Yeah. Awesome. What's a good starting point? Like if say 3 guys are going to start getting together and they're just brand new to this, all they've got is my piece of paper with questions on it. Like the first blank I have here is, what passage are we studying for this week, or Bible readings? What would you recommend as a good starting point?
That's a good question. So it would depend like what type of group it is, and where you're at, and what their hunger is. So, for example, if it's with brand new believers or non-believers, the Creation to Christ series, it's on the website.
Okay.
Is a great space to start, because it gives you the skeleton outline of the story of the scriptures. So it gives you places to hang things on.
Cool.
And then there's some other studies on their suggested passages, like the Hope series in there of passages about hope. There's ones about the miracles of Jesus, drawing people to Jesus. For us on our street, we've been working our way through the book of John.
Okay. Yep.
And we just find the bite-sized passage that we can handle. We've kind of caught the rhythm for what that is. So we just basically show up, hey, where are we at in John today? Okay. And we did this also in church, where we just, as our pastor was speaking through Philippians or Acts or First Peter or whatever it was, that we just mirrored whatever they'd done that morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have like things that you're going to read or journal during the week between meetings, or is this just getting together, reading it, exploring it, and then trying to live it out during the week?
Yeah. Their
homework.
Yeah. For believers, the one piece that's important is that as you come out of your Discovery Bible study, when you make your commitments at the end, we've added in 3 minutes of silent prayer before we share what our I will statements are. I will do this, or who I will share with this, so that we can be listening to the Holy Spirit in that moment and be quiet before Him. Right. To remember those things, to write those things down, so that we can hold each other accountable. Right. That's really important. Yeah. And then the supporting piece that, like in countries where this is really taking off, like I mentioned with our folks over there in Prague, that add-on piece of where's that? The daily Bible reading on your own. It's this is coming in the mail as of yesterday, but I could send you this as a PDF. It's a SOAP's Bible reading. It's just a simple process. Yep. And the idea of reading 5 to 7 chapters of the Bible every day. Lord, what's a specific piece you want me to focus on? What does it say? Apply it, prayer, and who will I share this with? And then, so if that's happening every day as regular self-feeding. Right. And then what's a real bonus in, like, if your groups, you're doing like groups of three people, right? Yeah. Triads or even small groups of maybe 3 or 4 couples or something like that, but it can vary. We're trying to kind of go with the triad thing because that's pretty COVID proof. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Indeed. Like if they're already in trios, like especially if they're the same gender,
Yeah.
Then one of the nice things about that is men and women can share their internal stuff of the old stuff that God's telling them to put off and the new stuff that they need to put on.
Yeah.
If the groups grow to being, like say, 5 to 9 people and they're mixed genders, they're houses to houses, then adding an additional piece where people get together for an accountability group or a life transformation group where they're getting a little bit deeper into the dark corners where God wants to clean cobwebs out of them. Then that's a really helpful addition.
Yeah.
To things.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jon. Anything else that you can think of that would be helpful for us as far as Discovery Bible Study Method? I mean, we covered a lot of stuff. Is there kind of a summary thing that you would kind of put this in a smaller package? We kind of went all over the place.
Yeah. As you've gotten the instruction about how to do Discovery Bible Study, you've got the formula on your page. First step is imitate that for a good long while.
Right.
Like 3, 4, 5 months. If you want to tweak little things, like tweak how you ask the question, or like in the accountability part, there's the 2 simple ones you've given. There's another idea of other accountability questions you can ask at the end. What's it called? Spec is another option to it. Like adapt later. Don't innovate right away. Because you'll end up doing stuff like we did in Prague, where you innovate and go, we really don't need the left front tire, do we?
It's actually pretty important.
And then you go, we really don't need the winch or the roof rack to serve other people. And then you realize you've trained your group that you don't need to serve. So what you do for the first 4 weeks will be incredibly hard to change after. So just imitate what's there, get the hang of it, and stick with it, especially the obedience and sharing.
Right.
And if you make sure that gets there and you hang on to those things and help each other graciously and kindly get through the obedience and sharing, then the thing has the power to pop in a new kind of way, because that's the core of what God wants us to be doing with the knowledge he gives us, is to obey it and share it.
Yeah, absolutely. Live it out. Just don't know it.
Yeah.
I think James has a bunch to say on that right in the first chapter. Just a little bit.
pretty direct he is about that.
Well, Jon, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And it's been great to get to know you a bit better and your heart for God's mission and his church. And we're going to look forward to having you here in the future, right here in Gospel Chapel. And thanks for sharing with us what God's doing in and through his call in your life. So, and thanks too for just sharing with us about Discovery Bible Study Method and some of the great things that you've experienced with that, and the flexible way that it is to really experience God's word in community. And so, just thank you for that. How can we pray for you as you head into this new year of ministry?
Well, it's me trying to, there's so much interest in this that's popping up all over the place. And I have the responsibility of creating a network of mutual support, so that pastors like yourself who are figuring this out can get together and talk with one another. How are you doing this? What's going on? And you can discern together. So wisdom in collecting those networks of people who are doing this type of thing across Canada. And so I'll mention that to you. Next week, I'm presenting at a church or a ministerial in Maple Ridge, where there's some pastors that are trying to get this going in their churches. So helping set up those networks for people and individuals, please pray for that and do that well, so that people don't slip through the cracks. And the other thing is the COVID challenges of traveling. It means I've got a really big trip coming up and I'll be on the road for like 4 weeks, and I may be swinging by your place, so I'll be in touch with you.
Okay.
If there's a chance to pop in and say hello, but that's hard on me and on the family to be away for so long. But COVID constraints are what they are, and we try to flex like water, but we appreciate prayer for those road trips.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, again, thank you. And can you just maybe close us off in prayer?
Yeah, indeed.
Thanks.
Wonderful Father in heaven, I thank you for all these connections that you've made and the roots that have gone deep, even in the wonderful connection that we have here with your church over there in Grand Forks, Lord. It's really fun to imagine all the saints that you've introduced our family to and that we're going to be celebrating with in eternity in heaven. And we get to partner with and adventure with now. With all the trials and tribulations you bring along, show us the pathway of how you want us to move forward. All the personal challenges in our life, the ones that are hitting our society, and the ones that may be coming against us as churches, as your servants, Lord, prepare us for challenging times that may be ahead. And may you free people with excitement and joy to dive into this new realm of becoming resilient disciple makers. And Lord, may you raise up wonderful servants for that region of British Columbia, in that city, and beyond Canada into far corners of the world, Lord. Show us where you want to go and who we need to be sharing with. Thank you that we are entrusted with this wonderful message. It's amazing to be your partners, entrusted as ambassadors of reconciliation. Show us how to do this and how to be even more reconciled and in tune with you. Fill us with the joy of your obedience, Lord. I know it's a promise and it will come. May this church experience that joy, and may they be a wonderful lighthouse to the entire community because of it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Awesome. Thanks again, John. Oh, the sun came out shining right in my face.
I see it. You're blanched.
It's like, whoa, it's kind of crazy. Anyway, I'm just going to stop the recording there, and I'll probably just fade it out after your prayer there. So, well, that was a great conversation I had with John. We covered a lot of ground in that interview, and we're looking forward to doing more interviews like this. In fact, next week I'll be connecting with Ricky and Karen Sanchez and posting that. And then we're going to do some of these interviews too with people from our own congregation. I have some of that lined up in the coming months. And so be looking for these gospel conversations, just sharing our life and story about following Jesus and what God's been doing in our lives. John mentioned a number of things about the Discovery Bible Study method, so I'm going to post some links in the description down below. There will be a link to Avant Ministries there, so you can see what Avant does and connect with them there. And also the Discovery Bible Study method. John mentioned some different reading plans or topical plans that you can use. And so, again, just look down in the description for this video or on the podcast description, and those links will be there. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in, listening, or watching to Gospel Conversations. Have a great day.